Welcome to A Mick A Mook and A Mike,
Hosted by four-time Emmy-nominated producer
Frank Pace, and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guest, Senior Vice President of Casting for Warner Brothers Discovery Television, Tony Sepulveda.
My brother
Frank. How you doing today, pal?
Good. We got Tony Sepulveda on today, Senior Vice President of Casting for Warner Brothers. So he's been teaching at the Groundlings for 25 years. He'll be a great guest. But before we go to Joe West and before we go to Tony Sepulveda, I need glasses.
Why, you want to see what you're talking about?
No, I can't see it. I can't see when I'm driving anymore. So I need glasses for driving.
I just went to the ophthalmologist myself.
What'd you find out?
Found out that my wife needs glasses, which is no big surprise. Because I kept telling her I was handsome. But yeah, my eyes are amazing. I can't hear worth a shit, but I got great eyes.
You mean all those fires and everything you did, they didn't damage any retinas or corneas? Or?
Listen, I'm 74 years old. I can still read the newspaper without glasses.
Your eyes are clear. Like, I've noticed that when talking to you. Clear. You know how when people get older, they don't have this...
You know, when I was in Thailand, I was smoking so much pot.
Can he finish it?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm finished.
He
It's
just
fine.
gave me a lead. I was going to tell a story.
Let him finish the lead.
You want me to tell a story, don't you?
Yeah, tell a story.
Hey, tell us a story.
What do you think I am, a mook? Let me tell you a story.
No, you're a Mick.
So anyway, when I was in Thailand, I was smoking so much pot. I used to have a red line going across my eyes all the time. It was like I swear to God, it was like somebody painted a stripe across it.
Interesting.
And all the girls used to say, they used to call me Dawan. And what does that mean, Dawan? Sweet eyes. Sweet eyes. It was always whack, you know. But you say I got clear eyes now. See, I'm better now.
Yeah, clear eyes. Now, I bought these glasses. Where'd they go?
That's what you need. Where'd my glasses go?
So I bought these glasses, and I get them home, and I thought they were clear. My camera?
Yeah.
I thought they were clear. They're rose-colored glasses.
Oh, wow. You need that. You need that.
Your
doctor knew
Make
it.
him an optimist.
I can't now say I look through the world through rose-colored glasses.
Make him an optimist. Yeah,
Well,
your doctor knew.
Yeah, he knew.
He said, "You pessimistic bastard. Here, put these on."
Well, one guy who never needed glasses was Joe West.
Joe.
Can we bring on Joe?
I bet you a lot of people screamed at him you need glasses. He's heard it enough times.
You know, Frank, I'm going to get you a job umpiring.
So, Joe, let me ask you a question. Billy was talking about smoking pot. Now you can be forthcoming. Have you ever smoked pot?
You know, it was around a lot when I was in college, but I had trouble smoking regular cigarettes, and pop was a lot harder smoking than the regular cigarette. In fact, my mother worked on a tobacco farm when she was a kid, and she smoked every day of her life until this one day I was playing Little League Baseball, and the smoke bothered my eyes, and I said, "Mother, would you quit that because it bothers my eyes?" And she quit smoking that day. Wow. Never had another cigarette. So
I wonder what it was like for her working in the tobacco fields.
Well, she was one of 13 kids, and she was the fourth oldest woman of the siblings, and it was. They all worked on the farm. They were all tobacco farmers, soybean, corn, everything, and she later became an elementary school teacher, and the first thing she'd do the first day of class was she'd take an apple, and in her bare hand she'd just twist it and break it right in half. And all those little kids would look at that and say, "I ain't messing with her."
What state was that in, Joe? Where were you a kid?
She was in North Carolina. She taught school in Greenville, North Carolina, and it was she was, because of her growing up on a farm, she had the strongest hands you ever saw of any woman. It was unbelievable. And my brother used to sit in the living room when she'd be in the kitchen. He'd start screaming, and he'd holler, "Joe, quit doing that, Joe!" And she'd come in and beat the hell out of me. And I hadn't done anything.
So when did you turn the tables on your brother?
Oh, I got him one day when he threw a chair at me, and I just closed the door, and of course the chair went right through the door. And when my dad got home, uh, he went to beat John, and he said I wasn't throwing the chair at the door. And he said, what were you throwing it? He said, I was throwing it at Joe. And then he hit him harder.
So, Joe, AAA baseball this year is going to automated umpires behind a plate in all games. What do you think of that?
Well, it's going to be an experiment, but the one thing that bothers me is that all the kids that are going to be working AAA baseball and working home plate or would be working home plate are not getting the chance to improve their skills at that level to be the next guy that comes to the big leagues. So how do you call up an umpire in the middle of the season to replace a major league umpire who's hurt, who hadn't called balls and strikes all year? I worry more about the profession of umpiring than I do whether this machine's getting them right or not. But as I've told you before, that machine's going to miss about 7% of the pitches. And the last year I worked in the major leagues, we didn't have an umpire that missed 5% of the pitches. So the machine's not going to be as accurate as a regular umpire who's a quality umpire at that level. But I think the thing that bothers me is you're taking away a guy's development process in the minor leagues to go to the big leagues. And let's say this doesn't work. So for 1 year, let's say they have it for 1 year and it doesn't work. So now what do? You've wasted a whole year of development of these umpires at the AAA level, and that kind of bothers me. That scares me more than anything else.
Well, I just noticed that Major League Baseball called up 10 new umpires for this year to replace the 10 guys that have retired. It was a record number of guys retired this year. All of them had, at least 20 years of service. But the guys they called up all had worked in the majors before.
Right. Yep.
So do you think that they would get enough games in the majors that way? Because you bring up a good point. If you're not calling strikes during the game, how are you going to learn to call strikes? If you're not calling strikes in the minors, how are you going to learn to call strikes in the majors?
Yeah, and I'm not so sure this was a good experiment because, and again, they're taking heat from the media about calling balls. They took heat from the media about replay on the bases in the major leagues, and so they spent like $45-50 million setting up a replay system to prove that we're 99% right on plays on the bases. So I would much rather they spent $40 or $50 million helping the umpire development program than spending on a bunch of geeks trying to decide whether the replay angle is good enough to change a call.
I got it.
And even when they did go to the replay, the Players Association said we want umpires making the call in replay. We don't want a technician making the calls. So they created 8 new jobs right there. So there's 8 guys that have to be in replay every day of the season that aren't getting the same experience as we're talking about when you take them off the field or take them away from calling balls and strikes. So I'm calling balls and strikes, calling safes and outs, having an argument on the field. They've all been part of the game for 100 years. And this game is not broken. It's typically American.
How many games a year would you typically call behind a plate? 40?
Well, you work 120 games, 40 to 45. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're behind a plate, you're first base, second base, third base, and home. So you're probably 1/4 of a time. So.
Yeah, but we don't go that way. We go home plate, third, second, first. We go clockwise.
Yeah, no, I know.
The players are the ones that run backwards.
Let me ask you a question. How are they going to do this thing? Is it like a speed gun? How do they do it? This machine is going to
same way to do it on television.
Oh, same way. So, but how do you kick dirt on one of those machines? I have an argument with one of those machines. Doesn't that take a lot out of the color of the game?
Listen, when they first put in the Questec system, which was grading the umpires, it took away the wide strike zones like Lee Wire had before he retired. and it made John Hirschbeck tighten up his strike zone. It made guys like Eric Gregg tighten up their strike zone, so that they were all calling the same thing. Well, there was Kurt Schilling pitching for Arizona when this Questec machine came out, and it worked on these angles where they'd shoot a beam toward home plate, and they would judge where the ball is when they crossed both beams. So he went out and pitched. I think the first game he pitched with the Questec system, he threw like 40 out of 50 pitches that were strikes, and he had a real good game. The next game he went out there, he wasn't as sharp as he was the day before, and the pitches that were a couple inches outside, the umpires weren't calling them strikes. So he got mad and went over and beat the hell out of one of those machines that was in the dugout. Took a bat to it and everything. They fined him a big chunk of money for it. But and I mean, it was just changing the way things work, and it tightened up the strike zone. There was, I mean, Lee Wire worked with Lee Wire. If it got there in the air between the dugouts, he would call it a strike. And then
Greg Maddux loved him.
Oh yeah, and then
Did he call the Greg Maddux game that lasted an hour and 36 minutes or something?
Oh, we had a lot of games where they were all under 2 hours. I mean, well, you know, one of the best was Tom Browning. I can remember he had a perfect game in Philadelphia. He was pitching for the Reds against Philadelphia, and he pitched 8 1/3 innings, no hits, almost a perfect game. He hadn't had a guy on base, and then they got a hit in the bottom of the ninth. They got a guy to second base, and they took him out of the game. Anyway, so we're walking to the elevator, and this great big reporter from Philadelphia, his name was Bill Conlon, and he looked at us as we're about to get on the elevator, and he said it was almost a perfect game. I said it was a perfect game. It was an hour and 51 minutes. What are you talking
So shortening up the strike zone, right? And did they lower the mound years ago too to make it more of a?
Well, that was the year after Bob Gibson had such a great
1969. They raised him out.
They
They lowered him out. Yeah. Derek, you had a question for Joe?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got a question about this. So you guys you're not necessarily, well, Frank is, but the rest of you are not soccer game watchers. So this particular World Cup this year, 2023, was one of the best World Cups, well, 2022, one of the best World Cups in history. And it was also it was the first World Cup where they had, they used the electronic reviewing of all the plays and the calls from the referees. And it's been sort of in the history of the game, the calls have been a little bit weird in the past, which kicked a bunch of teams out that were not the teams that they wanted to see playing in the future kind of important games. So I think the soccer game actually benefited from this technology. Do you think that, I don't know if the game itself, well, do you think the game will benefit from it in that way, in that some of the calls will not have any bias? Or do you think that the people in control, the owners of the games, have the ability to control the game via the technology?
Is that a question or a dissertation?
Well, that was quite the speech, but you know, the problem with ownership running the game is they didn't play it. There are very few owners in any sport that played the game. If you look at the owners in baseball now, most of them are money management people or big corporate people. Jerry Reinsdorf may be the only guy left that's a real baseball aficionado. And even when Steinbrenner owned the Yankees, he was a corporate guy. He was not a baseball guy. Walter O'Malley was. Walter O'Malley and Augie Bush were, and they used to get in fights at the owners' meetings, and sometimes it had ramifications. But they were baseball people. A good example I can give you is when they built the new stadium. Well, the stadium before the one in St. Louis now. Augie Bush went up to the guy that was in charge of the whole thing, and he says, "Where's the umpire's locker room?" And he said, "Don't they come dressed?"
Yeah.
That's
And,
terrible. It's ridiculous.
and he said, he looked at the guy and he says, "I'm going to go over here by the first base dugout. And when I come back, you better be able to tell me where the umpire's locker room is." And they put it right where they were going to house the groundskeepers. So the umpire's locker room was behind home plate, closest to the field that you'd ever seen, and it was immaculate when they got done with it.
Yeah.
So
I'll bet. I
and
think.
then
Guys, go ahead, Joe.
and then you got a guy like O'Malley. When he left Brooklyn because they wouldn't let him build a dome stadium in Brooklyn. The city council refused to let him build a dome stadium to replace Ebbets Field. So he talked to Horace Stoneham to go into California to be the only two teams that were on the West Coast. And he wanted to go to San Francisco because he was a banker. And then San Francisco wouldn't give him the land to build his own stadium. He was going to build it himself. And so he goes to LA and says, "What can you do for me?" They said, "Well, we'll give you this place called Chavez Ravine," which at the time was nothing more than a trash dump just north of downtown. And so he hired architects, engineers, he hired everybody he could to build this place. And he built it with the perfect specifications for a baseball field. And then while they were building it, part of the property was on a square plot of land in this ravine. Part of the property, they found oil on it. So Union 76 harvested the oil for him. And they said, "If you'll let us have the only advertisement in the ballpark, as long as you own the club, we'll build the stadium for you."
Wow.
So he paid the city of Los Angeles $1 for the stadium, for the grounds. And Union 76 built him a baseball stadium. At the time, it was $65 million to build, which was a fortune at the time. But the oil company built the stadium. And they actually had a gas station in center field, if you remember that.
Yep, you just look out at center field and you can see the 76 there. And I never knew why they were there. I just figured they paid for it and had it like everybody else did.
Yeah, wow, what a great story.
Gas station in center field, huh?
Well, Joe, thank you again. You've been illuminating with your views and stuff that you know. That's one of the reasons why you're a guest. Great stuff.
Always a pleasure, Frank. Billy, Derek, it's always good to see you.
We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Weren't the Brooklyn Dodgers called Dodgers because of the trolley cars?
Yeah.
They had the Dodge on the way.
Yeah, they were called the Trolley Dodgers.
Yeah, trolley Dodgers.
Yeah. So another good interview with Joe. I mean, he's always
got so much information. And some of the people he's rubbed elbows with. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We got a guy waiting.
We got a guy waiting, Tony Sepulveda.
Yeah.
So
we gotta go. Let's go see him.
Well, okay, let's
go see
bring him
this
on.
guy, Tony Sepulveda. Name the street after him.
Yeah.
It's okay with him.
Yeah, just bring that mic slightly closer.
Tony Sepulveda.
Wow.
How are you?
Wow, what a great setup.
Yeah. We got
You too.
3 cameras and everything. Is that your kitchen?
No, it's not. I can't show you my background because it's not interesting.
Yeah, but
so
I'm surprised you're not showing us the Hawaii background that you usually use. The golf course background.
you know, we did with. Yeah, I'll do this one. Yeah.
All right.
Tony, that's Billy O'Connor.
Nice to know you, Tony. Pleasure.
And that's Derek behind the controls.
Hello, hello.
Oh, sir. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Hi, Derek.
So how was the groundlings today?
Good. You know, I've been teaching there for 28 years. Can you believe it?
Wow. I can't. Who are some of the people that you've put through there? And why don't you tell the people a little?
About the groundlings themselves. Yeah.
Tell people a little about what the groundlings is and who's been some of your successes in the 28 years.
Well, I've been. You know, it's really weird. My trajectory in this business is odd because I started off as a casting assistant, and I was so bored wanting to do something creative that I took classes at the Groundlings. And the Groundlings, it's primarily a sketch comedy troupe. A lot of famous people from Saturday Night Live came from the Groundlings. Starting all the way back to Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman's character was developed there. And, you know, Julia Sweeney, Phil Hartman, John Lovitz, and then more recently Anna Gasteyer, Will Ferrell, Will Forte, Maya Rudolph, Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, all came out of there. Kathy Griffin.
Well, I won't hold that against you.
But they're all, you know, we're all like family, so it's a tight knit little group there. But I started teaching there in '94. My first class was during the '94 earthquake, so that was so that's how I remember when I started. Octavia Spencer was my student. Cecily Strong in SNL, I was her first teacher there. There's a lot of people I can never remember when everybody asks me that. Greg Berlanti was my student at the Groundlings.
Greg Berlanti is, by the way, one of the most successful Hollywood producers ever right now. What are some of his shows?
Well, he does all of the DC comic shows for us, but he also does The Flight Attendant. He does Riverdale.
Sex Lies of College Students?
Blind Spot. I don't know if that's his. No, that's Mindy Kaling's show.
So is it an improv group, the Groundlings?
It's primarily improv, but primarily sketch comedy, but you learn improv, and improv teaches character. Character creates content. So, as opposed to UCB, which is mostly an improv group, we really have more sketch comedy shows than we have improv shows, although we have all of it. So
you were interested in comedy from the jump, from the opening?
Most of the stuff I cast as a casting director was sitcoms, and most of the shows that I cover as a casting executive are sitcoms. But I like everything, I just have I'm more in tune to it because part of my life at the Groundlings was I was the director there. I wasn't much of a performer. It wasn't really what my goal was, but I really loved being the director over there.
And you started off as a tour guide at Universal?
Yeah, it was my first job.
What was that like?
Well, everyone thinks when you're a tour guide at Universal, you're going to be become a famous actor, but there's really not many famous actors that were tour guides. There's a lot of famous other people like Mike Ovitz and famous writers and producers and things like that. But there's definitely people that were actors that were tour guides, but you would think there would have been more like real famous names.
So how'd you segue? How did you use? We often talk about getting your foot in the door any way you can as to getting into production or getting into show business. How did you use the Universal experience to take your next step?
Well, it was an accident. I was when you gave tours, after a while, you were begging not to give tours. So they would throw you out in the information booth or help you load trams or even work the toll booth at the parking lot. And you were so grateful because repeating the same tour over and over again became, it was a challenge. So I was working the information booth and I was sitting next to this tour guide and she was talking about doing an internship at a casting director's office. And I said, at the time I wanted to be an actor. I was going to UCLA. I was studying theater there. And I said to her, can I give you my headshot and resume? And her response was, everyone asked me that, no. And I thought, well, that's a really rude response. And I thought, if I ever did that job, I'd never say that to anybody. And another friend of mine from UCLA was just nagging me to do an internship in my last 2 quarters at UCLA in the industry. And so if it wasn't for her, I really wouldn't be where I am today. And so I took an internship in casting under Meg Lieberman. And she hired me as an assistant when I graduated from UCLA. And the idea of that being the chosen internship was because of that girl I sat next to. And to this day, I would never deny anybody giving me their headshot and resume.
See that?
It had an impact on me.
Less than 10 minutes into the interview, we talked about how lucky he got to sit next to that person to get you your interview.
It's always about a break. It's always about a break and being lucky at that. But having the gear to walk through the door when the door opens. But casting director. Now let me play as a metaphor. If I wanted a brother-in-law in show business and I wanted to break into show business, would I want a producer for a brother-in-law or would I want a casting director for a brother-in-law?
Depends what you want to do.
What do you think, Frank? I think it's a producer, but go ahead.
I think it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be an actor, you should definitely meet a casting director. Because
yeah, definitely. That's true, but I also feel that the producer actually is the person who says, yes, I will hire you. Casting director just suggests you for a job.
Yeah, that explains a lot. So the hierarchy of it is the casting director says, this guy should play the part, and the producer says, I'll okay that?
Yeah, I've always used the tie salesman analogy. A producer walks in with a brand new suit, and you show him about 5 or 6 different ties that can go with the suit. And depending on your relationship, he may really listen to you, or they may, in fact, just choose the tie on their own. And that's basically what we're doing, is showing them the different varieties of ties they can wear with the suit.
But
And
you will have had to pre-screen them. You would have had to pick out shirts. You would have
that's right. All of that stuff.
You would have to, match the shirts to the suit, to the tie, and that's a lot of work.
From a layman, pre-screen them. What do you mean by pre-screen them? You mean just do the background on them? What does pre-screen mean, Tony? Yeah, I mean, what does that mean? Make sure the guy's not a convicted felon, or what is it?
No. It means that before I present to the producers anybody that I want to present to them, I read them myself first to make sure that they're not.
Why don't you start with breaking down the sides?
Yeah, so you basically get a script, and anybody that has a speaking role that hasn't already been cast, series regular or somebody that recurs on the show, if there's anybody left, that is your job to find who they are. It doesn't matter if it's 1 line or 10,000 lines, it's your job to find them. And you find them through using various resources, the main one being Breakdown Services, in which you make an announcement to all of the agents via a company called Breakdown, letting everybody know, informing everybody what it is you're looking for. And you will get thousands and thousands of submissions from every agent and phone calls to follow to submit actors that they think are perfect for the role. And you really don't have, it's a little different in today's day and age because everybody self-tapes now and you just present tapes to the producers. But in my day, you would actually bring actors in to read live. And in doing so, you really had to limit how many people you could bring in because you can't get the producers attention for that long. So you got to make sure you're bringing in really strong actors for each role. So if you don't know them well enough, you pre-screen them first to make sure they can actually do the dialogue. You obviously pull the scenes out that they're supposed to be performing, and that's when you create something called sides, which is the material that they'll be reading from the script. And,
it's pretty interesting. So, when you put out this all hands, pretty much what I'm looking for, so the days that Alana Turner sitting on a stool in a drugstore getting discovered is over. You have to have an agent. It has to be. Nothing's going to creep through without an agent, without representation.
Great question.
It's interesting. I was at a party once, and there was this girl that was sitting across from me, and we were talking. She was with her boyfriend, and she's like, I was at a casting at her friend's house, and I said, "Well, what do you do?" She goes, "Well, I'm an actress." And I go, "Okay." And I'm thinking, all right. And I go, what kind of work? She goes, "Well, I do mostly improv." And so I perked up there because of being part of the Groundlings. And she said she improvises at Disneyland. And I thought, well, you can't get that job easily. So it really piqued my interest. And I just happened to be casting a show that required the actors to all be improvisers. So I brought her in for it, and she ended up getting the role. And she became the lead of it, and then she's never stopped working since. And I wouldn't say that I discovered her because I was at a casting director's house of somebody who had already discovered her. But I actually gave her, I think, her first big job. So there was a little bit of that going on there. And it was just one of those things that you never deny. If somebody says they're an actor, you can't brush it off because you just never know who that person might turn out to be. And I think really inexperienced casting directors are very imperious when it comes to that relationship. Whereas those of us who have been around a long time, you just don't dismiss anybody because you just never know.
Well, when do you know? Did it ever happen that you see him and immediately say, "That's the guy for the part. That's the guy I want"? Or
yeah, it does happen. I was just in Montreal for the comedy festival in July, and I found this guy that I just went crazy about. I introduced him to everybody at the studio that I could introduce, but my days were numbered because he had an audition for Saturday Night Live, and CAA was already his agent, and he got Saturday Night Live. So there was nothing I could have done to prevent that train. But at least I knew when I saw him that this guy's going to be a big star.
Who was that?
Was that Pete Davidson?
No, this is just this year. Marcelo's last name's Hernandez, I think. He's just a brand new player on Saturday Night Live.
Well, a friend of mine just got a part on Saturday night. Michael Longfellow. He's from Arizona. He's an Arizona comic. Got a great face, young, clean, pure,
Yeah, that'll change.
Yeah.
That'll change.
But it wasn't. But my point is, it's not just me that discovers it. There were a lot of industry people at Montreal, and they all saw him, and they all got excited about him. But it's just that one person that gets them their first job. I mean, when I was in the Groundlings, I couldn't get Lisa Kudrow arrested. I would bring her in for anything I could bring her in for, or Will Ferrell for that matter. And nobody knew their body of work like I did. And then, Lisa got her break doing Cheers, and then she did Mad About You, and then obviously Friends was the biggest break for her. But I had nothing to do with any of that, So that was frustrating for me to be part of the Groundlings because I knew this talent before anyone else did.
Tony, what was the first show we worked on? Was it Head of the Class?
No, I wasn't on that. I'm guessing it was Suddenly Susan in '96.
Suddenly Susan was 96, yeah.
Yeah. I remember because when I was casting at the Olympics in Atlanta were going on.
Yeah.
That was 93 episodes, Suddenly Susan, that you did?
92, 93.
Yeah, it was just short of 100. That was too bad, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think the syndication pack number was reduced to 88. So we made syndication, but we never syndicated very well.
Yeah.
So, who did you cast on Suddenly Susan?
Well, I guess the biggest name was a 2-line video player named Shia LaBeouf. He was a pinball player. You just have those, like, you don't know it at the time. We put Sherry Shepherd on it. She had a small role at the time. And I'm sure there's others. I should have probably done my research on that.
Yeah, Sherry Shepherd turned out to be a good friend and a great talent, isn't she? Yeah, did you, well, you said you didn't work on Head of the Class, but we had Brad Pitt on Head of the Class in a small role in that. He did pretty well.
Was that John Levy? Was that when John Levy?
Yes, with John Levy.
Yeah, he also put Leo on Head of the
Growing Pains.
Yeah,
that Leo DiCaprio. For you uninitiated, unwashed, for you unwashed humans,
Mr. DiCaprio.
Mr. DiCaprio.
I actually read his father's, wrote a screenplay about Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo DiCaprio's father wrote a screen. He had a fixation about Leonardo da Vinci, hence the name Leonardo.
Wow. Was that right?
Yeah. I read it. A friend of mine gave me the script, and I wasn't supposed to show it to anybody, but it's I still have it. But anyway, you did The West Wing too, right? You did the...
Yeah, so my colleague John Levy did the first 2 seasons, and he was stepping down because of his workload with ER. And he'd already won 2 Emmys doing The West Wing. So he was very instrumental in recommending me to move on. So I took over seasons 3 and 4, which were Aaron Sorkin's last 2 seasons on the show. And then after season 4, I was offered this job as a casting executive. And everything sort of timed out right because Aaron was leaving the show anyway. I felt like I could do as much as I could on that show. It was an incredible experience, and I was very, very lucky to have that.
So what's the difference between a casting executive and a casting director?
So the casting director is actually the person who gets their name in the credits, and they are in the trenches, and they're the ones doing all the finding the actors and, the ones losing weight over stress when they can't find the actors. And, they're doing everything they can, but it's their job to present choices to the producers. And then once the choices are made, make sure everybody approves the actors, and then they negotiate the billing and the salary. Casting executive is essentially their bosses. The casting executive hires the casting director, and the casting director reports to the casting executive. So instead of casting 2 shows, I can oversee 15 shows. So, it's the same thing for you, Frank. The difference between being a line producer and being production executive is you can cover more shows.
Yes, you can cover more shows, and you pretty much do less day-to-day work. I always tell my production executives, when I was producing the show, I wanted nothing to do with the production executive. And,
right.
And that's the way I'm going to let you do your job. I have only 2 rules. Number 1, stay on budget. And number 2, I never want to be surprised. And as long as we deal with those 2 rules, we're going to get along fine.
Frank, we have the similar trajectory because I'm the same way. One of the respect I get from all the people I cover is they know that I was a full-time, online casting director for so many years, and they know that I'm not going to interfere with their job at all unless they really need my help. And my thing is the same thing. It's not quite the staying on budget part, but it is, other responsibilities that I expect them to adhere to before I have to step in.
But you have a big part in keeping us on budget also because,
Yeah.
you know, you have to deal with the agents and you have to give direction to the casting director who's dealing with the agents and the business affairs people who are dealing with the agents, business affairs being lawyers who deal with the agents. And, you know, if somebody wants $50,000 to appear in the episode and we've only got $30,000 to spend, you know, I mean, Tony, I guess would.
So he has to have that conversation.
He's
That's
gonna
really where I come in. I've got to juggle with every party, and when the agent says no, then I got to call them up and go, "Guy, you're really blowing this. If you think there's more money, there really isn't." Right. Because whenever we negotiate, the agent always thinks there's more money, and somebody's got to call the bluff of somebody else. You know, Frank and I are kind of going through that right now on one of our shows, and I think that, you know, we just have to just kind of like, at one point we really don't have the money, and I don't think the agents really understand that. Yeah. Because we just seem like we are, you know, fountains of money just flowing all over the place with the success of the studio, but it doesn't necessarily mean each individual show has that kind of money. And also there's a lot they're paying off too, you know. There's a lot of deficit financing, which is a very technical word, but it does require a lot of money being lost in this or invested in the success of another show.
Sometimes if a network really wants an actor, they'll pay what's called breakage. How would you define breakage, Tony?
So breakage is basically like if you want to put Tom Cruise on your show, Tom Cruise isn't going to do it for $5,000 or $6,000. Maybe Tom Cruise will do it for, let's just say for sake of argument, he'll do it for $50,000. The network will say, okay, we'll split that with you. And we're like, but why don't you just pay the whole thing? And the network will be like, well, we would pay the whole thing, but you own the show, we don't. So you're benefiting from this in the long run, and we're benefiting from it now, so we should split it. And that's basically the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, that's good explanation. Good explanation. So did you get your name in the credits on Friends?
Yeah, I cast. My colleague Leslie Witt had 2 maternity leaves, so I was able to run in and do about 22 episodes of it.
What season was that?
I think 4 and 6. My big thing was casting Reese Witherspoon, and I had to cast Emily, which was the woman that David Schwimmer eventually marries in London. And there was a couple other big roles like that I cast, but those were the 2 I remember the most casting.
Let me ask you, Tony, as a casting director, how much research do you have to do? How many scripts would you have to absorb to know that this is to make an intelligent choice for a character? You know, like for Friends, you'd have to know everything ins and outs about all that script before you decide to.
Well, on the Reese Witherspoon front, the producers called me and they said, we got to find a sister for Jennifer Aniston. And I had just seen Election, and I thought, well, what about Reese Witherspoon? It was just immediately out of my mouth. And they thought that's a great idea. And those were the days where anybody would do Friends. Julia Roberts, you know, all of these people had already done it. So I thought we'd have a pretty good step up to get Reese Witherspoon to do it. And I talked to her agent, and her agent said, I think we could get her to do it. And she did it. And it was great. I mean, Reese wasn't a fan of the multicam, but to her credit, we hired her for 2 episodes, and she did both of them, even though I don't think she enjoyed the process, because she likes to rehearse. And what we do in multicam is we run on a tape night, we'll run a scene, and if it's lacking laughter, the writers will huddle, and then they'll run to the actors and give them new lines to help boost the laughter. And it works. And the cast of Friends were just pros at that. You just throw them anything, and then they would just do it. But when guest stars came in, it was a little unsettling because they didn't get to rehearse it. They had to just do it there live in front of the audience on the second take.
Yeah, they got to rehearse for 3 days. On a sitcom, you rehearse for 3 days. And on the 4th day, you shoot. 4th and 5th days, you shoot.
So
improv is it's different. You don't get to rehearse anything. You have to, you know, at the moment, when Friday tape night comes on, it's the time that the writers really know if a joke will work or not, based on the audience's reaction. And that's where it's make it or break it with the actors. They can either just adapt with new material immediately, or they can't.
Tony, remind me, but when we were doing Suddenly Susan, we changed casts, half the cast after 3 years. You were right in the middle of all of that, weren't you?
Right, that's correct.
And what does right in the middle of that mean?
Well, we changed showrunners and we changed the path of the show. And so we ended up changing key characters. And it was just one of those weird situations where I had always thought the show was working the way it was. I wasn't sure why we were doing that. But we also lost, unfortunately, due to a death, we lost one of our key series regulars. So it seemed to be the time to make these changes. Just in terms of the trajectory of the storytelling. And it was hard to do because it was so subjective. Everybody had a different idea during the casting approval process of what makes sense for the next step in the show.
Who thought Eric Idle made sense?
I don't remember, because I remember Michael McKean came in for that and Fred Willard came in for it, and we had a lot of people of that caliber. I just don't remember how we got to Eric on that. But I did know we needed somebody completely, like a 180 from Judd, so it had to be an older gentleman and not a love interest. So that was part of the directive in casting that role.
How has casting changed over the years?
Well, the toughest thing right now is too many people are involved in the process. When I cast The West Wing, Aaron Sorkin would be in the office with me, reading with the actors, Tommy Schlamme and whoever the director was, and there's just the four of us in the room, and every actor would come in and read, and every actor came in and read. And Aaron would read with them, and then when we were done, they'd say, hire blank, and then I would just hire them. Now we got to put them on tape, we got to show it to the studio, we got to show it to the network, and somebody in that process may say yes or no to it, and it just slows everything down. So it's a much more overly complicated process than it ever was before. But to the defense of the people that are insisting on it, there is a quality control that everyone feels the need to do right now, and part of it is scrutinizing every aspect of it. And certainly, Frank, you definitely felt the difference in this as well. From your perspective, everybody wants to get involved because everybody wants to make sure everything's running as smoothly as possible. Whether or not it really does, based on the micromanaging, is debatable, but I think that the intentions are good. It's not coming from a bad place.
Well, you mentioned before about Friends, how good they were. When you threw them new lines, they could just incorporate them immediately. So improv, again, never goes away. If you're good at improv, it's got to help you all the way in the business. I mean,
yeah, that's right. But they were all trained. Lisa was definitely an improviser, and there were other people. I mean, Matthew, David, and they would all come off of sitcoms. Every one of them had, without exception. So it wasn't a foreign process to them. But I think Friends, I saw it more than I saw it on any other show. The huddling of the writers after a take, the running to the actors, the sort of nodding of the heads of the actors, and then going back. And then the audience would be surprised. They weren't expecting the lines to be different. They thought they were seeing the same scene again. And some of it was not that dramatic of a change, but it was the right tweak to elicit a much better, heartier laugh from it.
Yeah, and that sort of changed also when the cast started to get more powerful than the writers. The cast would often stay till 2 or 3 in the morning the first 5 or 6 years. By the time 7 through 10 years, they were out at 9:30 because the cast said, we're not staying to shoot this until every hour of the morning or of the early.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that it was as much their issue with being diva stars as much as it was like they saw an inefficiency to the process that they just wanted.
Yes,
to
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because all the writers on every show I've ever worked on have a tendency to, and I want to say the right thing. Their writing is critical, and without the good story and everything, there wouldn't be anything. But sometimes they get a little carried away with themselves.
Did you find with all the the more elaborate process of the whole deal that everybody feels their own self-importance, they want to be involved, and that just clutters everything up?
Well, I mean, to some extent, it's not. I think they feel a lot of times now actors are given an executive producer title. And for whatever reason, I feel that actors nowadays, when they get that title, feel somewhat of a responsibility to act like one. And it always hits casting first, where they want to be involved in the casting process. There's all different ways that they have incorporated their interpretation of what they think being an executive producer is. So there was a lot more hands-on, and that's also they're next on the line. Usually, the only time we give that is when they're the lead, when they're number one on the call sheet. So they want to protect that as well. And sometimes it may be a little crazy for them to be that involved, but I understand why they feel the need to, because this is such a changing business. You do one bad thing, and no one wants to be in business with you.
Frank,
So,
you mentioned that, and If These Lips Could Talk about Sly Stallone. His name is on it, and he wants to cover every angle of the production because his name is going to be the one that takes the hit, right?
because he's also experienced an abnormal amount of criticism when one of his movies doesn't do well. They just go for his jugular. So I can understand why he feels the need to be that way.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So what's the okay, based on the current format of auditioning, especially if it's via Zoom or online or via tape, does Robert De Niro get a role via audition if he was to audition? Because he's famously known as sort of like, when you watch him in dailies or even in auditioning, he's not so dynamic. Do you think that he would make it through the process nowadays?
Well, I don't know, because there is definitely the actor that can't really audition, but they're great on film. And unfortunately, so many actors fall by the wayside, especially in television, because the people that are making the decision just don't understand that concept. They need to see it.
Right.
And then they sneak into an indie film, and all of a sudden everybody wants to be in business with them. But the truth was they just couldn't audition, which is why you didn't hire them in the first place. And, that makes a lot of sense. There's also actors that audition really well, and then they just never get to that place again when you put them on the stage. Right. Especially in a sitcom, like they really kill on the audition, then all of a sudden we just can't get whatever magic they had to get the job. So it happens both ways. But to get back to what you said, it's interesting. A really famous actor may still audition if they really want the role, and it's a big producer or a big director. They still may audition for it. I don't know if De Niro does or not, but I think if he wants the role bad enough and he's being told, no, you're too this or you're too that, his ego may just say, I'm going to show you that I can do this.
Right.
So, but it's never publicized. Nobody really knows about that kind of stuff. The actors don't really talk about it, and the agents are really good about being hush-hush. We've had some actors that have been leads in our sitcoms or our shows that we didn't even hear until much later that they actually read for the producer privately.
Oh, wow.
We thought we were attaching them. So, that kind of stuff is always interesting to find out.
We heard a marvelous thing from Lakrita, who was on last week. She said that the first time she ever saw anybody in person was at the table read. She was cast.
That's a really good example of what we went through on that show. That was the first pilot I think I worked on in which everybody was cast virtually.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever had a John Wayne as Genghis Khan moment? Like when you said, I cast this guy and what the hell did I do? Did you ever have one of them and say, oh my God?
Honest to God, if I had, I would just forget about it. I would never want to. I really would. I tell you, I block stuff like that. People used to say to me all the time, if I audition bad, are you going to remember? I said, I got to spend so much time remembering who I like. I just can't remember bad auditions until you've done it about 12 times. And then I finally realized that they're,
Barnett Kellman used to keep note cards on every actor he ever auditioned. Did you ever do anything like that?
Yes, I had to after a while, Frank, because I was forgetting that kind of stuff. And what I started doing was, every year all the schools graduate, NYU, Juilliard, Yale, all that. And I was just meeting hundreds of actors a year. And what I started doing was just keeping note cards via contacts, literally, like they were in my contact folder. And I would just keep pictures and all the notes about our meetings just so that I could remember who all these people were. And so when I was a cast director, I had to do that because it was just getting out of hand, especially when I was doing the West Wing, because I didn't have the benefit of using breakdown services, because the way that show was done was so last minute. I'd get a script in the morning. I get 2 pages in the morning, and the UPM would say, Tony, it's the only thing we can shoot tomorrow. You got to cast it this afternoon. So I didn't have time to put out a breakdown or anything. I would just bring in actors at 4:00 in the afternoon. Aaron, Tommy, and the director would come down. We would look at all the choices, and then we would cast them by 5 or 6. And then they'd be like, God, Tony, that's amazing that you got this done so fast. And I said, it's not me you should be praising, it's the costume designer, because they don't even start until 6 o'clock at night for a 6 a.m. call the next day. And those were the people I had the most empathy towards, was the costumes.
It's remarkable. On a sitcom, we do 5 days. The first day is table reading and some rehearsal. Second day is producer run through. Third day is studio network run through, and the fourth day we're shooting. It's incredible to me how many times, and it's a tribute to Tony and his people, how many times on Tuesday or Wednesday we would decide to replace an actor, and the role shoots on Thursday, and at 2:30 we'd say to Tony, we need another actor for this. Can you get somebody? And they would get somebody, and they could work the next day. It was incredible.
Let me ask you, who gives the tap on the shoulder? Hey, pal, you're not on the first team anymore. Is that the director or the producer, or who gives the...
Neither. It's Tony calls the agent.
Honestly, that's what it is. I mean, sometimes the producers will call the actor and say, this isn't you, we had a change in concept, or we try so bad to not make it the actor's fault, because a lot of times it's really not. When a show starts out, Frank, if you remember this, our first season of the Suddenly season, we were literally replacing an actor every week. And it was getting to be a little crazy, but there was so much pressure on Suddenly Susan, because it was the show that followed Seinfeld on the famous Thursday night lineup on NBC. This was the coveted spot. And so there was so much attention on the show and so much scrutiny by hundreds of people, it felt like. And we had to get every single moment right. So if somebody wasn't looking the right way at a run through, we can't afford this to go to tape night. So we did it a lot.
Yeah, my concept of casting, I got a lot of it when I was producing commercials. I was producing commercials with Howard Morris, who was a great show business legend of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And how he said to me, he said, let them do what they want to do, because whatever they believe in will be what they feel and what you see. You can't, every actor can take direction, but I want to see what they believe in first, because really the casting people don't know what they're looking for when they're casting a role anyway. The producers don't.
Right.
The producers don't know. The directors don't know. So they want you to show it to them. So I want to see what you believe, and that's what Howie always said to me.
That's great.
That's really
Frank, that's always been my advice to actors, is that, don't try to guess what we're looking for. Just do what you're going to do best, and convince us that's the best way to go. Because if you try to do what we're looking for, there's somebody better than you are at that, because you're compromising what you think the initial concept of the character is. You just play yourself in the best way you can in this role. It either works or it doesn't, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work, because you're the best audition you could do.
Yep. Billy, I basically said that in my book. If These Lips Could Talk, you may want to read it someday.
I think I did more than read. I think I read it about 40 times, if I remember correctly, when I was editing it. But you did say that. But let me ask you a question, both of you a question. Before this breakdown thing, is it fair to say, is it a fair analogy to say that a casting director would be sort of like a scout in baseball, like a baseball scout? Find the talent, go out and find the talent, be there where you're picking the fruit, before it gets spoiled.
Well, that's what Tony was doing in Montreal.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, the thing is to note also is that in the old days of, I've got this weird lighting on my forehead. I'm trying not to get that in there. Sorry.
You're not hired, Tony. You're off. You're just the lighting. You're out. You're out.
In the old days of Hollywood, agents would come to your office and they would have a discussion with you about what you're looking for, and then you would tell them. And that was before Gary Marsh figured out the breakdown, which is sort of the most miraculous idea ever in the history of our business. But before that, it was really about, a lot of FaceTime with agents, and they would come to the office, and that's basically how the business ran. And the casting director didn't really exist so much. It was really producers would have a casting executive, and, you didn't really see the title casting on anything until the 50s. Some of the TV shows had it, not all of them. And then by the 60s, in television, you started seeing casting on the credits.
I got a question about this. So you talked earlier. I want to know what this. You got an audition. You have a role, and you got a cast obviously for the role. do you have a checklist? Like, is there what are you looking for in that audition? Do you have like person's dynamic, good looking? Like how do you get through the process of capturing the right person? Like, how do you filter through the process?
Well, that is a great subjective question, because I'm sure every single person that would do this podcast with you guys will give you a different answer. But I think the longer we've been in the business, we realize that if we did a checklist, we would really be putting a lot of stress on ourselves. So what we have to do is we have to just emotionally or mentally feel that this is it. And more times than not, when they walk in the door, you really do know when it's it. You really.
Wow.
When we cast Nestor on Suddenly Susan, we knew immediately that was the guy. There was no question. And every once in a while, you just have that great feeling when you know that you found the person. And it's undeniable. Nobody ever questioned it when we put him through the process. Everybody else was like, "Well, is this the way to go? Is that the way to go?" And the best thing in the world is when they walk in and they just do it, and you really don't ever question it. So yes, there is a little bit of a checklist, because we do have to adhere to the creative vision of the creators. We do have to have a certain type. But when we did a show called Harry's Law, David Kelly really modeled after Lewis Black, but for some reason it wasn't working out with Lewis. I don't think he was available or something. And then David Kelly's wife said, "Well, why don't you cast it as a woman like Kathy Bates?" And that's what we ended up doing. And that wasn't really something that we thought we were doing when we started the process. For example, when we did the pilot of Call Me Kat, the character of Phil was actually named Phyllis, and a Fox executive had pitched the idea of making it Phil and casting Leslie Jordan in the role. So that was not the original conceit of the role, but that's basically what ended up happening through the casting process. So you can never, the one thing I will say about being in the business a long time is you can never say there's an exact way of doing anything, because you'll always be proven wrong.
And like what Family Matters, Urkel wasn't considered a great star in that, and he was cast as a guest star, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't do the first season of Family Matters. I did seasons 2 through 6, I think, or 2. Yeah, I did 4 seasons of it, 2 through 5, I guess. And my colleague Melinda Gartzman, who did the pilot of Family Matters and did the first season, came into my office, because we were all in a suite of offices. She said, "I've got to cast this nerdy kid to be opposite Laura." And so she goes, "I just got to read everybody. Will you help me?" So I read like 50 kids for that, but she's the one who read Jaleel, not me. And so at the end of the day, I said to her, "I've got this, and this kid." She goes, "Forget it. I found him." And she goes, "He dressed him in a bow tie. He dressed in suspenders, and he completely just became the role." Like there was no doubt in her mind after pre-reading him that he was going to get the role.
And he wasn't even part of the main cast initially.
No, he was a two-liner. It's like Jack K and 227. These were parts that were never meant to be other than a one-timer. They kept writing him in, and by season 2, when I took over, he was now a series regular and by far the star of the show.
And also that happened with Mimi on Drew Carey show.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I did the second season of that, yeah.
And was it as much to do with the way he presented himself, the dressing of Urkel? I mean, was it much to do with that as it was his? I mean, the way, the ridiculous.
I can tell you, in the history of television, when there's over-the-top characters like Urkel would be, or Mimi or whatever, they're not really over-the-top because the actors really believe that these people exist. So they are not playing out anything. They are being these people. And they are being people that are just naturally over-the-top people. But never do you feel like they're playing at it and winking at the audience. I certainly didn't think that with Kathy Kinney on Drew Carey, and I never thought that about Jaleel. I thought Jaleel was kind of a master at it. At that young of an age, I could not believe how he could hold the attention of all these people.
Yeah, I think Henry Winkler was sort of a non-regular on Happy Days, who became the star of Happy Days.
Fonzie,
yeah, it's one of those rules that just, one of those things that just happen a lot, every once in a while.
Hey, Tony, why don't you tell the guys, Billy and Derek, a little bit about Barbara Miller?
So when I started casting in 1985 as an assistant, I was an assistant on Facts of Life and Fame under Meg Lieberman. And then she partnered with a guy named Mark Hirschfeld, and then we added Married with Children, 227, It's Gary Shandling Show. And we were starting to build a really great company, and Meg and Mark were just the greatest people to work for. On Sunday nights, I would go bowling with this group of managers and actors that included Barbara Miller. And she and I became friends, and I was obsessed with Lorimar because they did Dallas and Knots Landing and Falcon Crest, and I was just obsessed with Dallas. And what was happening was I needed to move up the ranks. And even though I loved Meg and Mark, I knew that I would always be their associate that moved up, and I wanted to make my own name. So the hardest decision I ever made is when Barbara offered me a job to come over to Lorimar. And I did it. And Barbara was a legend because in every single TV show that Lorimar did, she'd have her name in the credits as executive in charge of casting, and then the casting director would be underneath her. Something you have never seen, you'll never see again. That kind of billing would never be given. But she was one of those people that could be very difficult to work with, but you could also just love her, especially if you were socializing with her, because she was just this great person. But as an executive, she knew everything. You couldn't tell her anything that she'd forget. And so she was on top of, I think at the time, Lorimar was doing about 15 or 16 shows. There wasn't a single one she didn't know what was going on at any time. And as a casting executive now, when I get frustrated over things, I go, oh, this is why Barbara was that way. I get it now. And it's sort of like, life lessons, now I'm experiencing the things that she experienced, which is just frustration over the process, basically.
And Barbara was always impeccably dressed. Can I see your pen for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, impeccably dressed and always went to best places and had great jewelry. And I remember an agent going, I love that ring, Barbara. And she just took it off and gave it to the agent.
She was a phenomenal person. And she ruled casting with an iron hand.
Yeah, she really did. And she really promoted a lot of great people and that kind of stuff. She was definitely the reason I'm here.
Let me ask you, Tony, as a casting director, do you look at, like if you read a book and the book is going to be made a film, and then you see the film, do you ever second guess the casting and say, oh man, that's terrible casting? I mean, does that just natural? Do you watch movies different than I do, in other words? Does that come into play all the time? How do they cast that? Do you ever stop working?
We definitely do that when it comes to casting. I'll never forget reading the Harry Potter books and then seeing the cast and going, oh my God, that's brilliant. I thought that was the best casting ever after reading those books. Every once in a while it's done completely right. Kathy Bates doing the role in that she won the Oscar for Misery. I just thought that was the greatest thing. She wasn't a household name at the time, and I knew her as an actress, and I thought that was just ingenious casting,
The opposite effect, will you think that's terrible casting? Or?
Yeah, but again, I'm so bad at remembering things. I just purge any kind of that stuff. I just don't think of it. There's too much to remember. I cannot, whatever. But like right now, we're doing the book version of Presumed Innocent. And the one thing I didn't like about the movie, I thought Harrison Ford was great, but that was such a great book in the 80s. And I just felt like 2 hours did not do it justice. It was far too complicated to wrap that story up. And I'm really excited. J.J. Abrams producing, David Ketty producing and writing, and Jake Gyllenhaal is the lead. I just think it's going to be a great. We're about to start production next week on it.
I didn't kill my wife. I didn't kill my wife, huh?
Yeah.
I think that the ability to take stuff that you want to forget and just be. Is it fair to say when you said your style of producing is you take the monkey off your shoulder, you throw it at the guy and say, do your job, and I don't want to hear from you if things are going, unless there's a problem. Right?
Was that directed at me or Tony?
You. Executive producer, you say, look, this is your job. I'm hiring you to do this. Do the job.
As a production executive, yes.
Yes.
And it was the same job, the same philosophy I had as a producer. If we like you work, we'll bring you back for next season. If we don't like you, we'll fire you. Because this is a can-do business. If somebody says they can't do it, we'll find somebody who says they can.
Yeah. Simple enough.
Simple enough. But most of the actors you don't get that from, because all of the actors believe in their capabilities and they believe they can do anything.
I got a question. Another question. When you guys are casting roles, sometimes you're watching an actor and you go, oh, she reminds me of this actress, or you remind me of that actor. Does that happen in the casting process? Do you guys look at actors, or do you have a role where you say, oh, it's going to be like a Tom Cruise type character, or?
Yeah, we'll do that. But, ultimately, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself too much because you're going to find yourself really disappointed if you do that too much. I'll tell you one of the greatest casting things. Ken Miller and Nikki Valco did the young Sheldon, which was, a lot of pressure to bring back this iconic character from The Big Bang Theory and do the origin story of him. And we had already established Laurie Metcalf to play his mom. And, on the series Big Bang Theory, she'd always recur. And when it came to casting young Sheldon, we had to do not only a younger version of Jim, but also a younger version of Laurie Metcalf. And we ended up casting her daughter in real life. And I just thought that was ingenious, and she's fantastic in it. But it was not something, we didn't plan on doing something like that. But, to say a Laurie Metcalf type and then to actually cast her real daughter in that role,
Right.
Because sometimes when a show like The Big Bang Theory exists, you can't get away with casting differently for those iconic roles. So
that's sort of like the Sons of Newark, when Gandolfini passed away and they did the sequel. They cast his son as young Tony.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And then I have another question. This is a little bit of a funny thing to do. But if you were to, you've spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes with these guys on the podcast right now. Can you cast them in a role? So I'm gonna.
It's such a good question, because let me tell you something. That is a question that is often asked by, like, when the kids graduate from Yale, they go, "What do you see me as?" When I always say it, we know what we're going to cast those two in. They're going to be in a movie about bank robberies. That's okay. But it's so hard for me to answer those, because what I don't like to do is, like, I'll say to an actor, they'll say, "Well, what do you see me as?" And I go, "Don't ask cast members that, because the inexperienced ones will tell you. They'll list it off, and you're going to think that that's true. But it's really what you feel. Who do you think you are? Don't be delusional. If you're not a model, don't pretend that that's what you're going to be. There are certain attributes, height, weight, that kind of stuff. But you really have the ability to prove yourself to do almost anything, as long as there's not physical restrictions to it. And if that's who you believe you are, then market yourself that way, But don't depend on the kindness of strangers to tell you what your path is. It's not really what you're asking, Eric, but that's sort of why I was just leading into it.
That's a good answer. But Tony, can I at least be the brains of the outfit?
Yeah.
I like the Tennessee Williams reference, the kindness of strangers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Can you see this guy right here on screen right now? Can you see him playing a bookie?
A bookie.
Who?
I think he means me.
Oh, he's frozen.
Oh.
Yeah, see, you stunned him.
Okay, hold on. Let me figure out a way to do it. Oh, this is like so bad. All right, I'm sorry, guys.
No sweat.
No worries. Just sit down on that famed casting couch. Let me find out what that baby is in.
Yeah.
I can't talk about that anymore. Boy, that's
a no-no, huh?
I have to say, I've always blamed the producers of Hollywood of the 30s for that expression, because there wasn't any casting directors doing that back then. It was the process.
It was the process. Sure. That reminds me of a question. Casting, this comes from a good place, because I think when you were doing Friends, they had an all-white cast.
Yeah, that's right.
And that can never happen today.
Right. Especially
which is a good thing. Do you find that most guest stars are going to diverse characters now, or
you want to just make sure there's a good balance of everything that you can get into a show? It's going to. We're all striving for the same thing, which is to represent what the world looks like.
Right.
And so, in the 1990s, that was just the way television was sort of structured, and it wasn't just Friends; it was also Cheers, and it was a lot of those shows. But we've all, that's the great thing about evolution here. We all learn from this, and we make it better, and we do what we're supposed to do, And so it's a great time right now for everybody in terms of, it's it's not just the fact that we're so committed to doing that. It's just what we're showing the world. I think is what's so great about it.
Yeah, and like I said a lot recently, you use the right word, evolution. Television is evolving. It's evolving into the 2020s and then 2030s. It's no longer what was being produced in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, 10s, or teens. It's evolving, and so is streaming networks, and we face all the challenges that every evolutionary period faces.
Hopefully, so is the country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that we represent a microcosm sometimes, and I wish it was a little bit more widespread, but I feel like we're getting there.
Yeah.
The saddest part I have for anybody is finding your niche somewhere on television, because there's not 2,000 channels. And there really needs to be a guide to figure out where the hell you watch these shows, because I get so confused sometimes.
Yeah.
I have to go through every platform I own to try to figure out. When I found out Yellowstone was on Peacock and not on Paramount Plus, I was so confused by that.
Yeah,
you know?
or I think it's on Paramount, not even Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus has got the Stallone thing and 1820.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first run is on Paramount Network, whatever that is, wherever that can be found. But once it's done, it's transferred over to Peacock. So if you want to watch all the, previous seasons, it's on Peacock exclusively. So it's really interesting the way television works.
My good friend Mary McNamara, who was a guest on an earlier podcast, said her job used to be easy. She was, the critic for the LA Times. She said, my job used to be easy. I used to, watch a lot of shows twice a year and be done with it. Now the season's all around. She says, I can't even keep track of all the shows. She mirrored your response when she said, I don't know what's on anymore. I don't know when it's on.
Yeah, it's my running joke with people. They'll say, "Have you seen, Pencil Holder?" And I go, "Pencil Holder? Where's that? What's on the tabletop network?" The tabletop network. What the hell is that? They have tape dispenser and they have paperclip, and I'm like, "What are those two shows?" and you just go into this spiral of, "What are you talking about?" and it's just like, it's like my running joke with everybody. I just can't keep up with it, and we need to keep up with it in my job. So.
Well, to me, I swear to God, with all the different channels and all the subscriptions and all this is going on, it's like shopping at Ross's. There's something good in there, but you got to go through so much shit to find something good. Right. It's just, you might get lucky.
Yeah, you're right. And we have to rely on people that we know and love, that we really trust their taste, and then they'll turn us on to good stuff. So it's all out there. You just have to find it,
Yeah, where are the best actors right now? What shows are they on? I mean, that's a bad question to ask
it's a subjective question. It's not a bad question. I feel like, they're definitely on the streamers. I mean, but you've got, all of a sudden you'll find some really great person like Renee Zellweger doing that show on NBC about the Dateline woman was brilliant. And I don't know that anybody saw it. It was so good. It's some of the best acting I've ever seen. And yet I don't know how many people actually saw it. It's called something about it. I forgot what it was called. See, I can't remember the name of it.
She was a powerhouse woman in it, right? She was like really, I think I saw it. I can't remember the name.
Yeah, she murdered a friend, but everyone thought the friend's husband did it, and she was just, it was
Renee Zellweger is always good.
A show like that was Vikings, which aired on the
great actors on the show.
History Channel. I don't think anybody ever saw it. I don't know who saw it besides myself and my wife.
Yeah, that's right. That's such a good example of that,
Yep.
I watched a couple episodes of that. It was real good. Real good acting.
Well, I think we've taken enough of your time, Tony.
Well, I feel like I'm at a weird angle now, so this is probably the best time for me to leave.
Come on, I know.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
Thanks for being with us, Tony. Really good.
Pleasure to meet you, man. Thanks for clearing up some of the...
Guys, all three of you. I hope you enjoy your gangster movie that you're doing with the bank robber movie, whatever it is.
Two behind the ear. You get two behind the ear, Tony. That's it.
Two behind the ear. That's who I'll be. Two behind the ear, Tony.
I'll be Tony 2 times. Tony 2 times. Say everything twice. That's me. I say everything twice. I'm Tony 2 times.
Derek, how do you deal with these people? I have no idea.
Oh, it's been a labor of love, Tony, and so has been working with you.
Thanks, you guys. And Frank, that's great. We're on our 20 years together, so this is great.
Oh, wow.
30 years.
Beyond 20. Yep.
Yeah, 30 years.
All right.
Yeah.
Be well. I'll see you.
Take care, Tony. Nice meeting you, pal.
Uh,
I'll see you on the set.
Thanks for coming on.
Bye.
All right. See you later.
It was a really fascinating guy, man. It was a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah, we're trying to get people from all different walks of life. Tony, two-ton Tony. So
Two-ton Tony Galetto.
Be a bank robber movie. Two behind the ear, Tony.
Two behind the ear, Tony, and Tony 2 times.
Tony 2 times.
Says everything twice. Tony 2 times. Hey, remember me? Remember me?
I'll be Meyer Lansky. I count the money.
But you guys should bring in some. What do you guys call them? Like the sides. You should bring in some sides and do a couple of
some sides.
Yeah, we'll bring in some sides.
I want that casting couch. I want that couch. I want to find it. He got nervous when I said, "Them days are gone."
We never did that. We never did that.
Like
that was the executives.
I told Derek the story. What do you think about rape? What? What did you hear? What did you hear? Who said what? I didn't do nothing.
Oh shit.
Oh. All right. So that was another great episode. I enjoyed that. It was a good conversation. He cleared up a lot of, casting director. What is a casting director? What's the story?
Casting director, casting executive, all sorts of things.
Well, listen, thanks for looking in. I guess that's it. Are we done?
You tell me.
Is it a wrap?
Unless you have another long-winded story.
I told you about the 2 Irish guys planting trees, right?
Yeah.
I didn't tell you that. I told you that. I told you that one.
Tell me that next week.
Next week.
All right.
We'll save that one for next week.
See you, folks.
All right, folks. Thanks for looking in. We appreciate it always.
Next week's guest, entrepreneur owner of the national chain of comedy clubs, The House of Comedy, Rick Bronson.